This is Iraq. See? You can see his big teeth there, his big smile. Right here. This was before his accident in Iraq.
Gerald Jensen joined the Army when he was 34, much older than the average recruit. He was called to duty by 9/11, says his wife Robin, and deployed to Iraq in 2006. Sergeant Jensen was the driver for a commander in his unit, and by all accounts, he was an exemplary soldier. In the fall of 2007, Jensen's patrol was attacked. An explosive ripped through his Humvee, blowing off part of his face and piercing his body with shrapnel. Jensen still managed to drive away from the attack, saving his commander, before being shot in the arm and the back. That incident brought him a Purple Heart.
You can see the stitching, and then it goes all the way around, all zigzagged. This was 2 months after that, and that you can see he's had another surgery.
Doctors rebuilt his jaw with titanium. After 2 years and 16 surgeries, Jensen volunteered for a second combat tour, this time in Afghanistan. He was assigned to Bari Alai, a remote outpost that faced near daily attacks from the Taliban. Soldiers called it Barely Alive. 6 months into his tour, Jensen fell while running to a gun post and re-broke his jaw. Doctors did their best to patch him up a second time.
So they redid all the titanium and extended the titanium all the way to touch here, where before it was just like right to here.
Half his face was permanently numb, and now he had no teeth.
Are you beginning to think that maybe it's time for you to leave the military?
Yeah.
That you just weren't on your game?
Right.
I mean, you'd had this extraordinary career, this incredible experiences.
I kept having trouble with my knees and things, and so our primary care manager asked me if I'd had enough yet.
And you said?
And I said yes.
Jensen, no longer able to fight, was transferred to Fort Carson, Colorado's Warrior Transition Unit, or WTU. That's a special unit set up to help wounded active duty soldiers, help them heal, and for those like Jensen whose military careers are over, help them transition to civilian life. Once there, Jensen says commanders seemed bent on getting rid of him. They wrote him up for minor infractions like showing up late to a medical appointment or making an incomplete stop at a stop sign. Then, Jensen tested positive for amphetamines on a routine urinalysis. He had been prescribed pseudoephedrine and narcotics for his injuries, which can cause a false positive.
They say that I have a dirty UA. I'm like, well, I'm on all these medications and stuff, and yeah, I'm not doing anything illegal.
Jensen asked to be retested, but instead, WTU commanders told him they were kicking him out of the Army for what they called a pattern of misconduct.
They looked at me and told me that I didn't deserve to wear the uniform now, nor did I ever deserve to wear it, and that I was a disgrace, and I should be ashamed of myself for letting my family down and my wife and everyone else.
Jensen says the Army now wanted to push him out with no unemployment insurance, no GI Bill for education, and no health benefits.
Not only did the Army want to kick him out with no benefits, they wanted to give him an other than honorable discharge, which is just sort of like an icing on the cake, a bad icing, that would keep him from getting any benefits probably for the rest of his life.
Dave Phillips is a reporter at the Colorado Springs Gazette, Fort Carson's hometown. He began to hear stories about soldiers like Jensen and has spent months writing a series documenting numerous battle-damaged soldiers forced out of the military without benefits.
If they kick out these soldiers in a way where they get an other than honorable discharge, then they don't automatically qualify for the VA. They get their education benefits taken away. They can't even apply for unemployment. And so they're really left with nothing.
It's called being chaptered out. Soldiers may be discharged for reasons ranging anywhere from tardiness to substance abuse to more serious crimes like assault. Many have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and some also have traumatic brain injuries, both of which can influence behavior and judgment.
The number of soldiers getting kicked out for misconduct has gone up every year since the war in Iraq began. If you just look at the Army posts where the most combat soldiers are, the posts that might be most affected by misconduct caused by PTSD, 67% increase. So it seems to suggest that a lot of the misconduct is being driven by these constant deployments.
Since 2006, 76,000 soldiers have been chaptered out. Veterans advocates Robert Alvarez and George Andres Pogani say Jensen's story is not uncommon. At Fort Carson, they've seen case after case of wounded combat veterans being pushed out.
The moment you stop providing proper and appropriate and individually tailored treatment to an individual who's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, that person has a very high potential of developing behavioral problems.
Do you have any sense of why they are selecting individuals for this fast track?
These people become a burden on these units. They're taking up a valuable position, they can't replace them. They'll say that they have a mechanism to replace them, put them in a WTU. But the fact is you can't get in the WTU today. They've tightened it down so much, the parameters, that no one can get in.
Medically discharging a wounded soldier can take up to 14 months, say Pogani and Alvarez. And a commander cannot get a replacement soldier fit and ready for combat until the process is complete.
We've been at war for so long, and so many people have been funneled into that avenue that it is totally clogged. So these commanders are stuck in this position where if they try to get them out medically, they're still stuck with them, maybe for a long time. If they decide to kick them out for misconduct instead, they could be out in weeks.
We did ask Fort Carson commanders for an interview. They declined. Instead, they gave us this statement, quote, "The Army does not and will never discharge soldiers to avoid providing the needed medical care and benefits. Standards of discipline and accountability apply to every soldier, whether assigned to a unit or to a warrior care environment."
The Army is on record as saying that they will downsize the military by 80,000, if not even more. And they're also on the record as saying 40% of the downsizing will be accomplished through administrative separations. So what we're seeing is part of their policy.
Similar cases have been reported at combat bases across the country, from Hawaii to Texas to North Carolina, and not just in the Army. Andrew Long grew up hunting with his sister Brandy in the Oregon mountains. At age 19, he joined the Air Force and was soon deployed to Afghanistan. He was knocked unconscious when his Humvee ran over an IED, and on return to the U.S., was diagnosed with both PTSD and TBI.
I feel as though my service over there was probably some of my best moments of my career. Just how productive and how vital everybody's role was.
He was awarded the Purple Heart and named Airman of the Year, but privately, his life was falling apart.
I was drinking pretty heavily, and I knew that there were things going on that could probably be looked into as far as the mental aspects of the effects from the deployment.
Less than 6 months back from deployment, Long was involved in a DUI accident and an altercation at a bar near his base. He enrolled in the military's substance abuse program. Military medical staff argued on his behalf, but he says his commanders refused to connect his misconduct with combat-related injuries.
The soldier, they may be combat veteran. They're not as sharp as they used to be. They want to get rid of them. The easiest way is chapter.
America Tonight spoke with an insider from Army Medical Command who confirms that some wounded soldiers are being targeted for misconduct discharges in order to get them out of service more quickly. He asked us to protect his identity out of fear of retaliation.
If they have someone they don't like, they target him. They set up a couple formations in a false place for that individual, and they make the plan that that individual is going to show up there. And when they don't show up in the right place, we're going to write them up. They'll see a soldier that is on edge. They'll push them to get them to lash out.
A lot of these service personnel are being pushed out without any unemployment insurance, without benefits of any kind, access to the GI Bill, any kind of support. What happens to them?
The majority are homeless if they don't have a family to go home to. I've seen soldiers actually taken out to the front gate with all their possessions and sat down. They don't have a car. They don't have a family. So they're out there with a flat screen TV sitting in the grass.
In July, Andrew Long was discharged from the Air Force, losing access to benefits like the GI Bill and unemployment insurance. His discharge form cites misconduct and drug abuse.
There was no drug abuse involved. I never came up hot on a piss test or abused any type of medications. When an employer or an agency who helps veterans reads this, they now look at me in a different light.
Is this, do you think, the result of a deliberate policy on the part of the U.S. military?
This isn't part of a deliberate policy, but it's a result of a dysfunctional policy. Because the medical discharge system is so clogged, because it leaves commanding officers stuck with soldiers who can't do their jobs, it creates an incentive at a ground level to get these guys out in another way.
Service personnel like Andrew Long. He's moved back to his parents' house in Oregon. Jerry Jensen's story doesn't end as badly as most. Weeks before he was to be pushed out of the Army, a general who had met and been impressed by Jensen and his service intervened. She called Fort Carson commanders.
She called up Fort Carson and said, knock it off. You know, let this guy out medically in the way that he's earned. You know, and they did. But the statistics show that lots of other injured guys like him didn't have anyone to call, and they were just kicked out.
Today, Jensen lives a short drive from Fort Carson. His health is deteriorated, and he's still waiting for the VA to approve an operation that would give him some teeth.
These are service members. These are war fighters. This is a volunteer army. That should mean a lot.
But you don't think it does anymore?
No. It's sad to say, I don't think it means anything, because sometimes when I sit down with a soldier, they're so broken down by the things that have taken place, their dignity has been stripped. And so when you sit down and you talk to them, I have to remind them of who they are. You graduated from your basic training. You made it through the MEP station. You passed the physical. You passed the written test. Remember that day. Remember who you were then.